Hey y'all, hey, welcome to the Octavia Butler mixtape course. I'm Dr. Brianna Whiteside, and today we are discussing Butler's Parable of the Talents. Y'all, we have made it to week 2 of Parable of the Talents. We only have one more week, and we are done with the Parable series. As you come in, let me know if you can hear me. Tap the live if you want to come up and discuss the book tonight. You know what to do. Hit those two little guests at the bottom of the screen if you want to be a part of the panel. But I was just thinking that we've read a lot of works. Like if anyone has ever thought to themselves, I'm trying to accept people into the live. Anyone has ever thought to themselves, I don't read enough books, give yourself a round of applause because you've read a lot of books in a short amount of time, and that's no easy thing. Hold on. I'm trying to add people to the live. Okay. Drop your thoughts in the chat, type the live, get the likes up. We've made it to the difficult part. We have made it to the difficult part. And every time I return to this book, I always remember why this is a hard series. Okay. Why this one is particularly difficult to get through. But the best is definitely yet to come. Okay. I'm going to start as we wait for a few more people to come on. I'm going to start, as I always do, with Butler's words. Also, y'all, I can only stay on to 7 o'clock tonight. So we on borrowed time. So just keep that in mind. We're only on for an hour today and then back to the hour and a half next week. But I want to read from Butler's 2003 interview. It is, who is interviewing her? Daniel Burton Rose is interviewing her. Thanks for all the love, whoever just sent that gift. Daniel Burton Rose is interviewing Butler. And the portion that I want to read is particularly pertaining to social and political movements. And so this is the interviewer speaking first. He says, your work reflects many of the concerns and considerations of politically aware people, but you also maintain a critical distance from social movements. In Parable of the Talents, for example, the journals of Lauren Olamina, who's promoting one of these movements, are framed by a critical voice. Here's Butler's response. She says, by her daughter, yes. It wasn't so much maintaining a critical perspective. Her daughter, coming in as she did, was almost a direct result of my mother passing away. When she died, I had to clear up her affairs and get myself back together. I just bought a house in an expectation that she was going to come live with me. I had this big pause in writing the novel. When I got back to it, it had suddenly become clear that the mother-daughter story When I got back to it, it had suddenly become a mother-daughter story without my ever really planning it to be. The interviewer says, certainly a difficult one and a very painful one for the mother. Butler says, I didn't understand that for a long time. It was something that seemed to be working and I had to let it happen. But I think I realized later that it was mainly me missing my mother and being a little annoyed that she was gone, which is not logical, but people do things like that. And then he says, are there social movements that you identify with or are inspired by? And she says, not terribly, not in the sense of joining something. I'm with the ABB, Anybody But Bush movement right now. For the first time in my life, I was sending campaign donations to a political candidate, Dean, as a matter of fact, before he fell out. There are a lot of things that I care about, and I mentioned some of them with relation to the 2 parable books. I belong to a lot of environmentalist organizations. I really feel that it's important we stop playing games, and the idea that we're somehow going to improve the forest by having people go in and chop down the most valuable trees is just obscene. And the idea that we are going to lose environmental legislation for clean air and clean water that earlier groups worked really hard for is obscene. I mean, we're doing so much sorry. For some reason, I can't read tonight. I mean, we're doing such unutterably stupid things that we cannot not pay attention to. So last week we started to kind of get her daughter's voice, right? And she does come in very abruptly. And I thought it was very interesting that Butler kind of said that this was as a result of her missing her own mother. And so some of that is kind of shaped, or her grief kind of shapes this novel in a lot of ways. And so, yeah, y'all. Okay. Parable of the Talents. How many first time readers? I think I asked y'all that last week. I ain't gonna ask y'all again. Let me see what we got in the chat before we go to the panelists, and y'all tell me what y'all feel. How did y'all feel about it in the chat? I want to give y'all an opportunity. Kara says, I can relate to her missing her mother. Yeah, that's a pain. That's horrible. Tai Chi, hey, she says, I'm a first time reader. Michaela says first time reader and a really hard read. This series is a hard series to read, y'all. And as I've said before, people who say I encountered the Parable series first, or they're not talking about Parable of Talents. They're talking about Parable of the Sower. When they say that this is the first book and I fell in love with Butler's work, I'm like, absolutely, there's no way. There's no way you could have read this entire series and fallen in love with the harshness of the reality that we are kind of in a little bit, right? But we almost done. All right, panelists, what y'all got? Okay, what y'all got? How y'all feel?
So even though this is like, I don't know, my third or fourth time reading this, for some reason this time, again, I think it's because of the time that we are in, it hits me harder. Because I think before I just thought about, oh, this is off into the future and it'll never get this bad. And just, I had more optimism, I guess. And so now when I read about Christian Americans, I can't, I had to stop myself and stop calling it Christian nationalists, because that's what I kept thinking about.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's hard not to read this and then think about where are we? And I kept checking the dates.
We had a schedule. We're ahead of schedule.
7 more years, Mm-hmm. I kept checking the dates. Yeah, it's definitely a hard read. I told last time we talked, I did say I do like the back and forth between, or like the reading of the journals, and then her perspective of her mother, or what she's gleaming from it. And I had forgotten that she wasn't raised by her mother. Mm-hmm. And that everything she's thinking about or she feels about her mother or whatever else is kind of like, it's secondhand, I guess, or third hand. So that's, I think I remember how this ends, but it's just an interesting little point that is not the same thing as like my mother raised me, all of that kind of stuff, and then missing her in a different kind of a way.
Yep. Yeah, to miss someone, and this is from Larkin's perspective, or what I think is her perspective, to miss someone you never knew, or you never got to experience, and to learn about them and through their papers, through their writings, through how the world sees them, but still know that this is my mother, but I don't know her. But I'm grieving that, right? I'm grieving not being able to know her. And we don't want to do no spoilers. So, I'm trying to limit what I'm saying. But that's a tragic thing. That's a tragic thing.
So, can I just... Yeah, so in chapter 14, she says 17 months, eternity. And I honestly can't believe it was just 17 months that they were put through this, because it's unbelievable what they had to endure. It's absolutely disgusting and it's wild. But then my favorite part is that it comes to an end, right? And she says, this time the fire's only cleansed. And that was so beautiful to me, that's how fire was portrayed. Like, it was destroying everything, but also at the same time, it was destroying wicked. Like, honestly, what was happening at Acorn was so horrific.
Mhm.
And I'm glad that she saw it that way, as like a beginning, like, you know, a phoenix rising from the ashes. It has to, like, there's a beginning. And I also really appreciate what you said, because in the copy of my book, there's like some questions that Octavia Butler answers. Is that the same? I have a different one. Mine has like a reading group guide.
Oh yeah, I have that
And
in the back.
okay, yeah, she says that in '96 her mom died from a stroke,
Mhm.
and then she says it informed how she wrote about Larkin, and that was her. She said that was her mother's last gift to herself. But I had no idea that she felt sort of like abandoned or lost or sad. So that was the missing link for me, and that was really helpful.
Yeah. Um, because even thinking about Butler's abrupt death, right? It's crazy. But when we're thinking about, like, she had spent so much time, her papers portray this so well. It lays out everything. She spent so much time trying to make it, trying to make it, trying to make it. And she wins this MacArthur, and she's able to finally like stabilize in a way. And she's like, now I can finally take care of my mother, because in a lot of her paper, she is like dreaming of the time that she can buy her mother a house. She's dreaming of the time that, you know, she can pour back into her mother. Like she sees it as a badge of honor to be able to care for her mother in her older age, and she finally makes it, right? She finally is able to do the thing and feeling like she's going to be able to pay her mother back, and then her mother passes. And then she's also angry that the success didn't come fast enough, right? She didn't get a chance to do what she wanted to do. And, you know, of course, she was her mother's only child. And so she was her, and I think that I feel like, I don't know if I say this on the Substack or this is just a knowing that I have, like she took a long break from writing the Peerable series. Like there was like a 8-year kind of span before she finished it. Now y'all probably like, but she published them so close together because she was already writing them as she was writing the Patternist series. Like all of these novels were being written at the same dang time, right? Bits and pieces and fragments of them show up in early years. So for instance, what is it? Pattern Master, published 1976. It starts to show, fragments start to show up in the 60s. Fragments of Adulthood Rights, which is the next book. No, Dawn. Adulthood Rights is the last book. Dawn, Adulthood, the second book of the next series. Fragments of that show up in the 80s, right? And so she's writing, that she's creating this web of narratives, and she's holding them in her mind. But she's writing in fragments. So while there is a gap between where she's able to finish Parable of the Talents, the publication's date don't necessarily show that, because she was already writing them at the same time. I hope that makes sense.
One, it does. And one of the things I wanted to point out that really hit me hard in this read was the fire when they burned it, and you talked about it was cleansing. Obviously, the plantation, that Nottoway plantation burning, and the different responses of that burning, and the commentary around we're trying to preserve history, and we're trying to like it's a bad thing because now history is going to be lost and all of this kind of stuff, right? And people, and you realize they turned a plantation, which is equal to a concentration camp or a torture situation, into a resort or weddings and all of this other kind of stuff, and were upset with the community that was saying, no, this is a place of horror. We're not gonna, we find this cleansing, like, I mean, that kept coming up and over again, that this was cleansing and that the spirits can be released and all of this other kind of stuff. So it was, and the way that they thought about it, when she's talking about Jared's, his New America, and talking about these people that are following him and how they are latching on it's the same sentiment.
Mhm.
It's the same kind of like, I'm not thinking about it from any other side other than, hey, this is a good, hey, this could be better. He promised us he's going to give us jobs.
Yeah.
Or he promised us things they're going to go back to whenever they were going to go back to. And, you obviously did this to your, like, it was just something. It just resonated, hit me hard when I was reading this and then thinking about that plantation burning. And I couldn't believe that people were saying, oh no, this is like they were mad that people were happy that it burned,
Yeah.
but not mad that people were tortured.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, y'all know I do a lot of stuff on my TikTok, but I also I did a video a few days ago talking about how I did go to school on a former slave plantation where the master's house was being renovated, but still sat on those grounds. It was the Bodie plantation in Mississippi. And that plantation is still at the center of Tougaloo College, the college that I went to for undergrad. And though it was bought by I forget what society or organization bought the plantation from the Bodie family, and they turned it around and they did it for good. I mean, well, meant it for good, right? Tried to repurpose it for good, and they had well intentions, but the truth is that the weight is still on the plantation, right? You felt the weight is still on the plantation, right? You felt the weight when you're on those grounds. You saw things on that plantation that were unexplainable, other than their ancestral things still on this plot of land. Like there's still a spiritual draw or presence on the plantation, though it is no longer being used as that, though they've repurposed it to be a college right now. You still Michaela?
Yeah, Makayla. Can y'all
Michaela?
hear me? Okay. Can y'all hear me okay?
Yeah, we hear you.
Okay. Yeah, this I feel like for me personally was a very hard read. I feel like I was okay probably all the way up until around chapter 11. 11 through 15. I felt like that took me forever to read.
Yeah.
Because I was like, oh, I only have a couple more chapters left. I'll speed through. There was no way I was speeding through that. I said, how do people read this multiple times? Honestly, this will probably be my first and last time reading this, because I just felt like it's too close to like reality. This is too much of what I'm actually living. Too much of like, again, I know in the comments we had touched on like environmental racism and experiencing that, and I feel like where I live, we are heavily experiencing that. I live in Memphis, and so people may or may not have seen like what's going on in this area of they're polluting the air and all of that. So this is like, again, really close to home. And I also thought about like, oh, this would have been easier for me to read during Obama's presidency. I'd have been a lot more hopeful. I'd been like, okay, gotcha. Okay, noted. I can get through this. This is what like at this particular time for this to be like my first time reading, like I don't feel like I'll need I need a refresher at all.
Yeah. And I think that's fair, right? And I think you mentioning when you would have been more comfortable reading it, because in that time it didn't feel like this could ever happen, right? And I think that now we're seeing like this rise. Well, white supremacy has always been around, right? This ain't nothing new, but we see this rise of white Christian nationalism and extremism, right? And I say this as a Black believer, but we see this and it's horrific and it's terrifying, and they're cloaking it as Christian values, but it is not Christian. These are not Christian values. These are white supremacist values and have historically been that. And we think about the history. You cannot read this book in the present day and not think about the history and where we are right now, the history of Black people on American soil, but also where we are in America, under whose regime, I don't even want to say regime, under whose presidency, and the things that come along with that, and the possibilities and the potential. Like, this could happen tomorrow. And I'm not like a conspiracy theorist, but I can literally see a Jared America rising tomorrow.
Yes. And I feel like that's what makes it so scary, because it would only take a flip of the switch. I live in the South. I literally have neighbors in my neighborhood. I live in a HOA, and there are like 90 to 100 houses in our HOA. There are, I know for a fact, at least like 2 Trump supporters. One, because I walk by their garage every day when I don't go for a walk, and I see a flag. So like literally, I'm like, they could turn on us at any minute. And I'm like, it literally made me be like, maybe I need to be prepared. Maybe I need to prepare, I guess, a little bit more. Like, because I also feel like it's a different feeling when you live in the South versus when you live in the Midwest, or when you live further north, or even when you live on the West Coast. Like, there's just a different energy about the people that you are in community with
Yeah.
when you live in the South. Like, it's different. I'm sure even back then and even now.
100%. Black Stoop Kid.
Hello, hello. I wasn't here last week, but I was watching the recording. Um, I don't know. I just have like so many thoughts about like religion, about like the lack of education, the war on education. I work in higher ed, on like the student affairs side, and I advise college students. Um, and I, for one, am like really concerned about um, the lack of education and how we are in the midst of repeating history just over and over and over again in this like endless cycle. And it's just really sad to see. Um, I was in a meeting today where there were professors talking about how like some of their students can't read above like a 5th grade reading level. And I was thinking about how like reading, regardless of how you do it, either like with your eyes or your ears, like consuming media, nonfiction, fiction, like any of it is just so important to the way that we relate to one another, and the history, like learning our history, learning other people's history. It allows us to see things that are unacceptable and want to stop them. And I feel like the seeing what is basically like an uneducated population in the talents in this America where they've elected like Jared, and because they just like want to go back to like, he says that he can unify the country, like he can get us back to where things used to be, but like we can never go back to the way things used to be. We can only go forward, and our insistence on wanting to go back is the thing that is hurting us.
Yeah.
So like even just thinking about like what is going on in our America, like in the real present, and how I know that like last week you're all talking about like the 13th and 14th Amendments. And I was thinking about how like, if you've never consumed any sort of media about the Holocaust in Nazi Germany, like the warning about stripping people's citizenship is there. And like people, like Americans like want it to happen anyway. If we don't understand the context of like Black Americans in our history, then we miss why it's important that the Trump administration has specified that, oh, even if we do like weaken the 14th Amendment, it's not going to apply to Black Americans. Like, that is purposeful. That is not a gift. That is like, that serves a purpose. And I just think about like all of these things that I see that I'm connecting to history, that Octavia Butler is like connecting to history. Like, that is how she was able to write this book. But like, if we are not reading, if we are not learning, we cannot see the signs. And like, things will only get worse because we will think that whatever is happening is like, oh, this is the first time, let's try it, something new. But it's like, no, this has happened before, it did not work, the entire world condemned the country that did this, and like, yet we are here.
Yeah. I think a lot. Shanandi, I got you. I think a lot about what you said too about education, right? And as you know, the current administration likes the uneducated. They love it. You can do a lot with uneducated people. Uneducated people, and no matter what, they will vote in whatever interest that kind of sounds right, and you appeal to the emotion of it. But as Taichi said in the comment, that even educated people voted for Donald Trump in this election, and so we have to kind of ask ourselves, what type of education are we talking about, and do people really care about maybe the ramifications of history in the ways in which we think they should, or are they more concerned with the right now? Because I'm always on TikTok, and so I see the educated saying, or the business owner saying, we voted for him because he was good for the economy, not realizing how economies work, and how he inherited a certain economy, and how we were still under certain policies from the former administration and things like that. Like, the argument that I've seen is he was good for the economy at the first time it was booming, and then the other conversations I've heard was religious conversations, right? And you can do a lot with religious emotionalism, and I don't think a lot of people realize just how much you can do with religious people, and how brainwashed a lot of them are to kind of to always vote against their own interests. That's all I can say. Like, to always agree with the side that may not ever, maybe that's not for you, but you don't know that because your pastor said this thing, or you heard a minister say this thing. You know what I mean? So when I'm thinking about education, I'm always wondering, like, what education are we referring to when we're talking about that? And which sect of education, or what type of education do we think is under siege and is in danger?
Yes. And I'll say too that like, I think that there's lots of different types of education that are like important, and I don't think that like academia as it stands is like the only legitimate form. In fact, I kind of think that like the way that we do our education system in America like needs to be dismantled and started from the bottom, which was not a popular which is not a popular opinion in academic spaces, but I think that that's true. And I know for me, like, I learned so much just listening to the elders in my family. And I think that like, if people are intentional about getting a varied education, so like not just talking to the people like in your community, but going out and like talking to people in other communities, consuming media that is not necessarily targeted to you, like, there's lots of ways to be educated in what's the word, in a diverse way. So I don't want to what's the word, I don't even know what the word is, but like, I value all types of education. I want to like make that clear.
Yeah, no, it was crystal clear.
So one of the things they talk about, like the victor writes their history, their version of what happened in history, the versions of what happens in the wars. I think so. One of the things, again, it's the language that was used, and I should have highlighted so I could read it back to you guys. But there's this like with with the Nottoway plantation, they were given tours, and they were telling them, yes, there were enslaved people here, But the reason why there were so many enslaved people, the slave master, he cared so much about the enslaved that when he purchased them, he purchased their whole family so they could stay together. Wasn't that nice? And he allowed them to grow gardens and to hunt, so they could supplement their food. And so he was a slave master, but he was one of the better slave masters. And the people in the audience that this person was spinning this to were like, oh yeah, like, so the atrocity of slavery became, oh, it wasn't that bad. And so the same thing is the way when they talk about the re-education centers, and they talk about the orphans, and that they are helping these people who are like horrible people, and they're on drugs, and they're killing, and they're doing all these horrible things, but we're taking these children and we're going to give them a re-education, and we're going to take them and make them solid or whatever else. It's that I know this is wrong, but you're giving me enough of something that makes me think it's okay. And that's the same thing with Trump and everything else. Like, there was enough language around, you deserve that job that you didn't get. You deserve that piece of land, and nobody should come before you. And it's something that a lot like that somebody said, you first, and then everything else comes after you, was very evident. And so in the book, that was the message I kept getting over and over and over again, was how it was not important. Like, I'm gonna burn all the books. So knowledge is not important. Not this knowledge. It is not important. It is not important to read all the Bible, just the parts of the Bible that suit what it is that I'm trying to do. It's important to have a new structure, a new person to look as a God or a father figure or whatever, which was Garrett. It's important to give angry men something they can be proud of. So you are a warrior or a crusader, which is was a hell of a word. You are a crusader in this world, helping to get this world back to where it needs to be. But you lost the Alaskan Canada War. Your policies was making things worse. But that to hold on to that is more important than this, and that women need to just shut up and get out of the way. So I just think that when you talk about education, it's what type of like you said, what type of education and what it is. And I think people I just need to hold on to something that makes me feel whole. And what he was saying made them feel whole.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. The message resonated. It landed. Shanandi.
I was just gonna say that for me, what stood out to me in this book, and just thinking about things, is that history doesn't stop happening, and history doesn't stop. There's past history, there's current, and there's what's going to happen in the future. And for me, as I was reading this, everything, all of the atrocities that Butler wrote about, I could find examples in past, many decades, many centuries ago history, as well as history from our 20th and 21st century. Even before she named the re-education camps, as she was describing them, I said, that sounds like, what the Uyghurs are going through in China. As she talked about the kids who were taken from their families, that took me right back to 2017, where these kids were separated from their families and were put in there were a lot of them were adopted out that we just didn't know what happened to them. They were adopted out to different families, to white families that and were never reunited with their children. As she's talking about getting all the beatings and things like that, I was thinking about after when Biden was in office, and Haitian migrants were being whipped while the people were on horseback. So, it's I don't necessarily think that it's a Trump versus Democrats or anything like that. It's literally a government doing what they need to do to put forward their own agendas, whatever that agenda may be, regardless of whether they're red or blue. But it's all living history, and it's it's what we consent to as a population. And a lot of the what the people in Jarrett's America consented to is what was happening, and that's what's happening now, is what we as a society, what we as a country consent to, and what what the governments can get away with. And as long as we're comfortable, that's everything is, we'll slowly give consent until we end up in a place of going back to where we were 300-400 years ago. So it has not stopped, and it's what's formalized when, because slavery is no longer quote unquote legal, except for if you're in prison, then you can be forced into involuntary servitude, via the 13th Amendment. But give it a few more years, whether there's a Democrat in office or a Republican in office, just depending on what they feel they can get away with, we'll probably be right back there where some people are able to still be considered slaves,
Yes.
in public, out in the open. We're not in prison. So
Yes, you've said a lot. Yes, I think we're all what I'm hearing us all say. We're all on the same accord, right? We're all feeling the angst. Taichi is in the chat sounding off, saying it ain't no harder than Kindred. We hear you, girl. We hear you. But I think what we're, and I know you know this, but I think the hardness for us is like Kindred. Yes, that happened. Parable is happening. And if y'all haven't raised no Genesis yet, I ain't gonna tell y'all what's next. But it is that I think I think Butler had her finger on the pulse of America today, and that's the freaky part, right? That's the scary part. That's the part where we all like, yeah, we're probably about to get here. Especially when I think about the re-education camps. I think about prison. I can't read this book without thinking about me teaching in prison and how those things, that environment feels, how sterile it is. I can't stop thinking about the slave collars. This isn't fully explored in this section, but also those dream masks, that we have a example of now, right? With, is it Apple who has those masks, those VR things?
Yeah, I think it's Facebook
Google,
actually
Google.
made Meta.
Oh, Meta. That's what I meant. Yeah, Meta. So, but mind y'all, she's writing this mid 90s, not early, but mid 90s, right? And now we have those things. And we'll see in the next section how real that VR realm is for people. Because I think that's something to be said about where we're going with AI and how people, I think there was already nods to how people would rather be in those realities, those augmented realities, than be in society. In the same way, we're kind of there with social media, but not fully. But once they fully, how that push for like metaverse and all this other stuff, once this stuff fully rises from the ground, we'll just see just how just how crazy life can
Yeah,
get.
I think there's already like some of that actually happening, because I think it's not as maybe as mainstream, but there are small communities of people who live lives through these like gaming worlds where that where they don't have friends in real life, but they have friends when they built this sim community, for lack of a better example.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I do think what you said is key. Like Kendrick, yeah, that was hard to read, but like you said, it happened. It's in the past. I can look back and I can learn from it. But happening, and I even have to look like, okay, when was this written again now? Because this shouldn't be lining up the way this is lining up.
Yeah. It should not, but it is. There's no way around it. I'm gonna pull up some notes real quick, but anybody else want to go and say something?
I was just gonna say from that virtual reality stuff. This is why Star Trek is really important
Cut it out.
because then you
Cut
can
it
think
out.
about the hollow. You can think about the holodeck, which is a positive experience as opposed to the virtual reality. Talk about AI and everything. Just want to put that out there. You
Oh
know,
no, I don't know that
just
life.
saying.
I don't know that life. Okay. Anybody else want to bring up anything before we go to the questions? Anything that shocked you? You want to chat? You want to vent about? Okay.
I might be way out there. I'm trying to find my note.
Okay.
And I'm gonna bring up the D word.
The D word?
D name.
Oh.
I'm looking for my note. Hold on. Because I saw, well, I saw like, again, I may be way out there, but as she was talking about just the collars, how the collars were they they kept everyone everyone was connected by this collar. And I was just thinking to myself, this just reminds me of the Doro and Mary's pattern. How there was one controller where there was one controller that was in the vehicle at the time, the maggot, and everyone was linked to the with a collar. And it just reminded me of how everyone was linked through Mary's pattern, and she controlled their movements, and she controlled everything about the pattern. It just struck, that parallel just kind of stood out to me.
I can see that. No, I don't think you're far out there at all. Like, because, and even Lauren saying she could feel the grotesque nature of it, like how the experience was. You can feel the pain of the person, but you can also feel the pleasure
Hmm.
of the person, the person who's doing it, right? The captor.
Hmm.
And they are connected because sharers are connected to everyone. So it is like a pattern of sorts, but even like the shock on command that can happen to disable anyone who has a collar on is very like,
It was just like the external means of control. The collar, the slave collars were an external means of control, whereas the pattern was an internal means of control.
mhm,
So I was just thinking about that parallel.
yeah. Okay, y'all, I want to get to something about Lauren. I think Sam in the chat says, that she's starting to distrust Lauren. And, there were questionable moments in her leadership that I think I want us to kind of talk about a little bit. And if you're on the Substack, it's the question that says sexual violence, leadership, and ethical authority. And the question says, when Acorn is overtaken, Lauren instructs women to do what they must to survive, including enduring sexual violence. Given that Lauren has never been sexually enslaved herself, how do we evaluate her moral authority to lead in this moment? What are the ethical boundaries of leadership under conditions of war and gendered oppression? So do y'all remember when she's telling them, I don't care what you got to do, go ahead and endure it, right?
I think there
I
was.
I
Go ahead.
I have so many thoughts on this. Who wants to go first? I don't know. I can talk about this all day.
I guess since you're talking, you could go, McSam.
I honestly think that, remember in chapter 10 when she was saying, in a belief system, faith always comes in sooner or later into every belief system. I honestly think that that's what she's doing here. She's saying, listen, endure. Endure because she envisions a life amongst the stars, right? She's telling the people of Acorn, I need you. Earthsea needs you, so please survive. Just endure this. And sure, it's insensitive and it's ignorant, but I think her role in this story is to contradict the leadership of this America, which is unenlightened and they lack foresight. So for her, she here is exhibiting foresight. She's exhibiting a perspective that is outside of this horrid camp. So she's just saying, listen, write it out and endure. I see peace in our future. Like she said in Sower, heaven exists and you don't have to die to reach it.
And I think she was envisioning a life, as you said, beyond this current calamity and this current hardship. And the point at which she said, if we have to start saying "Long live Jared" and "God bless Christian America," then we'll say it. He's temporary. And another part, she said, "We'll do what we have to do, no matter who's warming the chair in the Oval Office. What choice do we have? It's do what you have to do now to survive, because beyond this, there is hope. There is a life beyond this. I feel like she wanted to imbue them with a sense of hope, to say there's something beyond this present circumstance. There's something beyond this present hardship that that we can look towards. So whatever you need to do to live and survive in this moment, to make it to the other side of this, just like a lot of people will tell their children, if you get stopped, whatever you have to do to get home, say the things, be as respectful as you can, and do what you need to do so you can come home to me.
Yeah, and I understand that part, right? My thing is these women, some of them had already been abused sexually by their fathers, right? They had already endured rape. They've already endured having their bodies taken from them. And in a way, they come along and they come under Lauren for protection. And the vision of Earthseed is liberation and all of these things. And then when the rubber meets the road, your leader is saying, endure it again. Take it again. I don't care if it has already damaged you, right? Do it again. And the reason why I bring this up is because Lauren at that point had not experienced this. So it's easy for her to say, yeah, we're gonna get through this. It's easy for you to say that, but to tell a abuse victim, right, someone who has been abused, and you have kind of, given them this illusion that this stuff is going to be safe and you're going to be protected and all of this stuff, but you're telling them again, endure again. I think that's kind of, I know the survivalistic nature of it and the vision, but it seemed short-sighted to me, right? It seemed that she was more concerned with the community that she was building as opposed to the individual who had already undergone having their bodies taken from them. Y'all know what I mean? Like, I don't think there was a right or wrong way, but it just felt gross to me in that moment.
I think when I read it, I didn't feel I understood. I guess maybe I understood that part, and the part that was important to me was the plan. It was endure the plan. Like her plan was, we're going to endure this, and we're going to learn, and we're going to talk about this, and we're going to come up with a plan, and we're going to escape. So it wasn't just endure it and shut up so we can just live. It's we're trying to then escape this. Mm-hmm. We're going to kill all of them or whatever. But in order to do that, in order to get to the part where we can like burn it all down and get free, mm-hmm. you're going to have to endure. Because if you don't endure with the collars, what is there?
But to push back, right? Because that I feel like that's fair, but it's too easy because her plan, she's married to the plan. She's not married to anyone else's well-being. She's married to her vision, and her vision arguably got her husband unalive, right? Because he was trying to leave, but she was so, I want this, we have to do this, blah, blah, blah. So she is, I don't want to say she Doro, but Butler said she Doro, right? Like, it doesn't matter what you have to endure for my plan to survive.
I don't think she was looking at it necessarily for Earthseed would survive, because she was about the community. I didn't read it like that. I read it more about the community, as opposed to just her vision of whatever Earthseed is. When it got to that point, I also think, and this could be, Octavia Butler being a boomer versus a Gen Xer versus a millennial versus all these other generations. It's this hardship. Like it's almost expected. You're gonna go through something. It's gonna be bad. You just got to get through it so we can get to the other side.
I think those people were casualties. I can't give her a break. Like, I think that, she wanted them to survive because she wanted her mission to survive. Not because she really cared, because they're only 1 year probation. Like, you can stay as long as you agree. You can stay as long as you obey me. We're going to see why I'm pushing against giving her a pass in the next section that we read. But it's too easy to let her off the hook as a leader. She's cultivated that she's done all these things. People have come alongside of her because they believed in what she was teaching. And yeah, she was probably in over her head. And yeah, we can here come Tai Chi on the but yeah,
Go, Tati, go.
I gotta say something though. I'm gonna agree with you because I just feel like as her husband told her, and also as a mom, when he was like, "Hey, we probably should go. We have a daughter, okay? You have your own flesh and blood that you need to be looking out for." And she kept going back to, you knew about Earthseed, you knew it's not just about Acorn. I'm like, but then when the rubber met the road, now you all concerned about where's your daughter? Where is she? Now it matters. Did you not think about what could happen? Because even when the husband was saying, "Okay, let's go to this other community," she could have even been like, "Okay, well, if she really cared, if she had a plan, I felt like for the other people, you know what I'm saying? You could have been like, okay, well, some of us gonna go over here, some of us will go to this community, and like we'll have some system where we check in, because they have a system from checking in once they left the re-education, encampment or whatever. So yeah, it was like I understood from like a larger, I guess, perspective. I understood like, yeah, we gotta get through this. You gotta keep some type of hope alive. I get that, but man, you just cared about what you wanted to do and nothing else.
You're asking her to give up something that she has been thinking about and writing about and all of that since she was a child, since she was 12 years old, and to abandon it to, because now this hardship has come.
Yeah.
This has been a lot of her life that she's been pouring into this thing.
Yeah.
And to say, okay, I'm going to give this up
Yeah.
because now, things are hard.
Yeah.
That's difficult.
But
But
you're
I
not
think
disproving our point, my point at least, that she's married to the vision. She's married to the mission, right? Maybe not the people. The people are expendable, right? We see leaders sacrifice people all the time for the mission. So yeah, absolutely. We can't fully expect her to do that, but we also have to agree or admit that these people are casualties. And we're gonna see just why I'm saying she is not this great person when we meet her again.
because even I'll say this, even if you weren't Earthy, she didn't really care about you.
Tai Chi.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Hi. Absolutely not. Like we see she's no different, and I say this with love. With any other religious leader that wants to further their purpose, I understand that this is her purpose. She's been thinking about this for 15 years. Someone put it in the chat that, oh, this is her purpose, and her purpose is her love for her people. I think it's to further her vision. I literally think it's to further her vision, and her vision, while she wants to say, let me phrase this nicely. While it includes the survival of people, it's not fully to protect everyone like she claimed and she said it was when she started Acorn. And I want us to be very real about that. And the way that she can, because she wasn't raped, and how insensitive that was to just say that these are people who were raped, brutalized, some of them had collars and diseases. She promised them safety. They tore that down. Whether or not, and I have a sneaking suspicion that her brother is involved. I'm just going to say that.
Okay.
So sorry. I have a sneaking suspicion that the way they got found out was because of Mark. But I'm going to keep that aside.
Yeah.
I feel as though the insensitiveness of her remark, and she keeps doing this. I don't know if it's neurodivergence or if she's just that focused on what she has to do. But like I just feel like for somebody who has never endured that wasn't her place, or she should have explained. I don't know. There should have been something with it. Like, I get it. Survive so we can get out of here. But there should have been something with it, because if you're saying that to me as somebody who may have endured this and, a character in the book, then you're telling me that I am too expendable.
And just to further, there is a line where she says, Earthseed lives, even though Acorn was destroyed. So that just lets you know that the mission, Earthseed is her child.
Trumps whoever, right? The mission trumps whatever, whoever, all of these people who she made change sisters, change brothers. It didn't matter. And I don't know. I thought the older she got and I don't know, the more she got to live with these people, had her own kid with these people, that at least she would have took a second to kind of consider everything instead of being so tunnel vision. And I also wanted to say that someone said that, said the faith quote, but she also said obsession was part of it as well. And I really want to highlight that as well.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not on her side.
Title Positive Obsession. So it is obsession, right? And I think she's maybe showing us the dark side of leadership, right? The leadership should never be a comfortable thing, right? And for Lauren to nurse this thing, as Shanandi pointed out, since she was a child, and now we can't expect her to walk away from it. No, but we also can't expect her to be so just like, if you got to endure, fight. But there is a line in this book where she says, Earthseed lives. We lost people, but the vision lives. And remember the quote, y'all, that I said last week that Butler says that Larkin and Earthseed were competing. They were siblings. One of them is going to win for their mother's attention and affection. I'm going to let y'all guess which one is going to win the affection of Lauren Olamina. We have a new person up here. Hey,
I just wanted to say, in terms of what you're just saying right now, we can clearly see who's going to win. Earthseed's going to win because, the thing is, Earthseed, I think in her case, I think Earthseed is what enabled her to survive coming from the other book. So that's something that she had no other kind of hope, no nothing. So the way out for her was through her writing and through the development of Earthseed. And somebody said about how focused she was. Yeah, she was focused on Earthseed and this thing happening that I think personally, she manifested the ability for them to be free. Because when you're focused on something very, very intently, like she was, the ability for those trees to come down and the soil and everything to come up, how all that happened, I think was as a result of her believing strongly, very, very strong to an energetic level that something was going to happen. Now, everybody else was kind of going along with something. Some people couldn't deal with what was happening. And they were not, and I'm not saying what she did was right, but some things happen on a whole metaphysical level when you're in a different space, which is where she was. And in doing that, you can't always consider everybody and bring everything full. And I know that's what we like to think. There's always going to be some casualties. There's always going to be some losses. And I think at one point she did say that to do that, to ask that of some people, even though they were abused and sexually assaulted by somebody else. So she did have that in the back of her mind at one point. But again, she just couldn't take that with her.
I can't tell which side you on. I'm trying to figure it out.
In terms of?
Like the conversation, like, are you saying that she is justified?
No, I'm not saying that she's justified. Okay, but what I am saying is there is still another dimension to look at this. I definitely don't see her like Doro. No, I don't. Because as someone said earlier, she at least gives people choice. She's offering them something. That's up to them whether or not they receive it or not. But I'm also with Tai Chi. I believe her brother Mark has something to do with it because the way they interacted together, she mentioned something about the other guy having something to do with it, but I was believing it's her brother, especially by the way they were interacting there and the way he left.
Okay, I ain't gonna ruin it, but let me just remind y'all who Butler says that Lauren Olamina's mentors are for this book: Winston Churchill, Richard Nixon, Harry Truman, Abraham Lincoln, Nelson Mandela. And then she writes, what must she become to get all she wants? What will she get? What will prove beyond her reach? I'm just taking it from Butler, right? I get what y'all saying. She's telling them endure. She's telling them to keep doing it. But there is a thin line that she's starting to cross. And we haven't gotten to the last part of the book, right? So we kind of like playing devil's advocate. We're in the middle. We're in the middle ground. But we got to start looking at her critically. We have to start looking at her critically. And I have some interviews that I'm going to read next week where Butler is actually critiquing her mission, Lauren's mission. I had to wait till we finish reading the book. Y'all, I can only stay on the 7, so we've run out of time. I'm so sorry. Next week, we're going to finish this discussion and we can bring all our grievances back to the chat or drop them in the chat. Like, the chat is open on the Substack if y'all want to keep going. You know what I'm saying? The chat is open on the Substack. Y'all can go ahead and go to the thread, but we have to look at her a little bit critically, because I know that the way Butler's setting up this narrative, Christian America is the villain. But there can always be more than one villain in a story, or someone who's short-sighted, but unwilling to course correct in a way. And so I want us to just keep that in mind as we read. Y'all giving Mark the 5th degree. We gonna see what happens with Mark. Yeah, thank y'all for participating. Come back next week. We'll finish this and we'll see where we stand. All right.
All right.
I'm gonna upload this. Try to upload it tomorrow. But I'll holla. Good night. Be safe. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.